The war between humans and the Veyron had turned the once living world into a wasteland. Cities that once stood with tall towers now lay in ruins. Fires burned in the distance, and the sky was heavy with smoke. For many years, both sides had fought without pause. No one remembered when peace was last spoken of. Every battle felt like another step into endless darkness. Aaron, a human soldier, crouched behind a broken wall with his rifle in hand. His unit had been scattered during the last attack. He was alone now, with no way to reach his comrades. His communicator had been destroyed, and the only sound he heard was the crackle of flames and the echo of falling stones. Dust covered his uniform, and a small cut on his forehead stung whenever sweat dripped into it. He pressed his back against the wall, breathing slowly, trying to stay calm. The city around him had once belonged to the Veyron. They were tall beings with scaled skin, sharp eyes, and voices that echoed like low thunder. Their buildings were made of stone and crystal, built to last for ages, but even those strong designs had not survived the weapons of war. Aaron knew he was deep in enemy territory. Every shadow could hide danger. Every sound could mean death. As he moved through the ruins, careful not to make noise, he heard something unexpected. It was not the sound of weapons or marching soldiers. It was soft, almost hidden beneath the rubble. A faint cry. He froze and tilted his head, listening again. Yes, it was a cry, weak and desperate, coming from a collapsed structure nearby. Against his better judgment, he followed it. The cries grew louder as he approached. He pushed aside fallen stones and broken beams, and there, beneath the rubble, he saw something that made him hesitate. It was not a trap, not a soldier waiting in ambush. It was a child, a young Veyron, small and frightened, with scales that shimmered faintly under the dust. The child's large golden eyes stared at him with both fear and pain. One of its legs was pinned under a heavy slab, and it struggled weakly, unable to free itself. Aaron's training told him to move on. This was the child of the enemy, the same race that had burned human colonies and killed human families. Yet as he looked at the child, he did not see an enemy. He saw only a helpless being who could not defend itself. His heart tightened. He thought of his younger sister back home, the way she used to cry when she was afraid of storms. War had taken him far from her, and he wondered if she still waited for his return. That memory made his choice clear. He slung his rifle across his back and began to lift the rubble. His muscles strained as he pulled at the stone, his arms shaking from the weight. Slowly, the slab shifted enough for him to drag the child free. The child whimpered but did not scream, watching him with wide eyes. Aaron placed the child gently on the ground and checked for injuries. The leg was bruised but not broken. The child would live. Aaron knelt beside the small figure. "You are safe now," he whispered, though he knew the child could not understand his language. The tone of his voice was enough. The child's trembling slowed, and it clung to his sleeve with tiny scaled fingers. Before he could move farther, a sound shattered the silence. Enemy fire! Blazing shots struck the ground near him, sending shards of stone into the air. Instinct took over. Aaron threw himself over the child, pressing the small body against his chest and shielding it with his own. The impact of debris hit his back, cutting into his uniform, but he held firm. Dust filled the air, making it hard to breathe, yet he did not move. He would not let harm touch the child. Time seemed to stretch. The noise of battle faded for a moment, replaced by the sound of the child's rapid breathing against him. Aaron's arms tightened around the small frame, protecting it from falling rubble. He could not explain why he cared so much, only that leaving the child to die would make him less human. He thought of all the times he had been told that the Veyron were monsters, but here in his arms was proof that they were not so different. Children were innocent everywhere. When the attack ceased, he lifted his head. The building around them was half collapsed but still standing. He carefully rose, keeping the child close, scanning the ruins for movement. He needed to get out, but he had no clear path. His body ached from the strain, and his side burned where a piece of stone had grazed him. Still, he ignored his own pain. The child's safety came first. The young Veyron looked up at him, eyes wide, still holding onto his sleeve. It made no sound now, only watched him with an expression he could not read. Aaron gave a small nod as if to reassure both the child and himself. He adjusted his grip, preparing to move again. But before he could take a step, a sharp voice echoed through the ruins. Deep, commanding, filled with power. Aaron's heart raced. He knew that voice could not belong to a child. He turned slowly, keeping the little one close, and his eyes widened. From the shadow stepped a figure taller than any human soldier. A Veyran adult, armored and armed with scales that gleamed like steel in the dim light. Her gaze locked on the child in Aaron's arms, and her expression was a mixture of relief and fury. This was no ordinary soldier. This was the child's mother, and she had found them. Sira stood tall among the broken walls, her armor scratched but still gleaming. She held a weapon in one hand, its sharp edge glowing faintly. Her eyes, golden and fierce, narrowed as they fell on the human soldier. She expected to see an enemy, aiming a rifle at her child, but instead she saw something else. The soldier was holding the small one close, his body curved around it in a shield of flesh and cloth. He did not raise his weapon. He only held the child tighter, as if he was the parent, and not she. Her chest tightened. She had rushed across the ruins, fearing she would find her little one lifeless, crushed beneath the stones. The war had taken many children already. She could not bear to lose her own. Yet here was her child, alive, safe, and clinging not to her, but to this stranger. Aaron's breath was heavy. His back ached from the impact of falling rubble, but he did not let go of the child. He knew the tall figure before him was dangerous. One swing of her blade could end his life. Yet he stood his ground. Slowly he lifted his gaze to meet hers. He had no words in her language, but his eyes spoke for him. He was not the enemy of this child. For a long moment silence stretched between them. The air was thick with dust, the ruins still groaning under their own weight. Sira did not strike. Her weapon lowered slightly. She stepped forward, and the child stirred in Aaron's arms, reaching out with small hands. "Mother," the young one whispered in the Veyran tongue. The voice was weak, but it carried enough strength to reach her heart. Relief washed over Sira. She dropped to her knees, arms open, and the child wriggled, trying to go to her. Aaron hesitated. Every instinct told him that giving up the child would mean his death. Yet he saw the truth in the way the small one reached for her. This was the mother. No soldier, no enemy commander, no faceless fighter. She was a parent, just as he had once known with his own family. Slowly, carefully, he bent down and placed the child in her waiting arms. Sira embraced the little one, holding them close, whispering words of comfort in her deep voice. For the first time since the battle began, her expression softened. She stroked the child's scaled head, then lifted her gaze back to Aaron. He braced himself, ready for the blade to strike now that his usefulness was gone, yet no blow came. She studied him instead, her eyes filled with a question she did not voice. Veyran soldiers arrived moments later, drawn by the sounds of collapse. They surrounded Aaron, weapons raised, their sharp teeth bared in suspicion. One of them growled, ready to strike, but Sira raised a hand. "No," she commanded in her tongue. The soldiers froze. They did not understand why she protected this human, but her authority was clear. None dared to challenge her. Aaron was disarmed and bound, his wrists tied with rough cords. He did not resist. He had known from the moment she appeared that he would not escape alive. Yet he was surprised to still be breathing. The child, resting against Sira's shoulder, peeked over at him, golden eyes curious rather than afraid. That small glance gave him a strange sense of calm. The soldiers marched him through the ruins deeper into the Veyran encampment. The camp was built among the broken city, a mixture of towering alien tents and damaged structures turned into shelters. Fires burned in metal pits, casting long shadows over groups of warriors. They stopped and stared as Aaron was brought through, their voices low and full of suspicion. A human prisoner was rare. A human prisoner who carried their commander's child was unheard of. Sira walked ahead, the child still in her arms. She led them to a large tent at the center of the camp. Inside, the space was lit by hanging crystal lamps that glowed softly. Maps and weapons lined the walls. It was clearly the place of a leader. She gestured for the soldiers to place Aaron in the corner. They tied him to a wooden post, his hands bound tight but still left him alive. Then they withdrew, leaving only Sira, the child, and him in the tent. Aaron sat silently, his back against the post. His body was sore, but his mind was alert. He watched Sira carefully as she placed the child on a bed of woven cloth. She examined the bruised leg, applying a salve that gave off a faint silver light. The child whimpered, but she soothed them with gentle words. Aryan felt a pang of recognition. He remembered his own mother once tending to his wounds when he was a boy. The moment was so human that he forgot for an instant that these were aliens. When she finished, Sira turned back to him. She studied him for a long time, as if trying to understand what kind of creature he was. Finally, she spoke. Her words were strange to his ears, but her tone was clear. She was asking a question. He shook his head, showing that he did not understand. She frowned, then repeated the words slower, pointing at the child, then at him. Aaron realized what she wanted to know. Why had he protected her child? He lowered his gaze, searching for a way to explain without words. At last, he pointed to his own chest, then to the child, then made a shield-like gesture with his arms. He hoped the meaning would be clear. Children were innocent. They should be protected, even in war. Sira watched his movements. At first her face was hard, unreadable. Then her expression shifted, only slightly. She seemed to understand. Her eyes narrowed, not in anger but in thought. She said nothing more, but her silence was heavy with questions she did not yet know how to ask. That night, Oren remained tied to the post, his body aching from the tight cords. The camp outside was alive with voices, the sounds of soldiers preparing for the next day's battle. Yet inside the tent, the atmosphere was different. The child had fallen asleep, breathing softly against the woven cloth. Sira sat nearby, her gaze fixed on the human. She did not look at him with hatred, but with curiosity. She was a commander, trained to see humans as enemies, yet she could not forget the image of this soldier, covering her child with his own body. The child stirred in sleep and mumbled softly, reaching out as if searching for comfort. To Aaron's surprise, the small hand stretched toward him, not toward the mother. For a brief moment, the bond was visible. The mother noticed it too, her lips pressed together, her mind caught between gratitude and unease. Aaron closed his eyes, resting against the post. He knew his fate was uncertain. He could be executed at dawn, or kept as a bargaining tool. Yet deep within him, he felt that something had changed. The Veyran commander had seen his choice. She had seen that he did not see the child as an enemy. Perhaps that truth would matter. Perhaps it would buy him more than a few hours of life. As the night deepened and the camp grew quiet, only two things remained clear in the tent. A child slept in peace because a human had chosen mercy, and a mother watched that human with eyes that no longer saw only an enemy. Morning came slowly to the Veyran camp. The rising sun cast pale light across the broken city, turning the ruined stone into shades of gold and gray. Fires from the night before still smoldered, and the air carried the smell of smoke mixed with dust. Veyran soldiers moved through the camp, sharpening weapons, preparing food, and tending to the wounded. Their voices were low, rough, and full of suspicion whenever they glanced toward the center tent where the human was kept. Inside, Aaron sat with his back against the post. His wrists were sore from the tight cords and his body ached from the previous day. Yet he remained alert, eyes scanning the room. He had survived the night, something he had not expected. His gaze shifted to the small bed nearby where the Veyran child still slept. The little one's chest rose and fell slowly, the bruised leg wrapped in a clean bandage. The child's breathing was peaceful. For a moment, Aaron allowed himself to relax, feeling relief that the young one had made it through the night. Sira entered the tent, her tall frame casting a long shadow across the floor. Her armor had been set aside, replaced with simple cloth that marked her as someone at rest rather than at war. Yet her presence was still commanding. Her golden eyes moved first to the child, softening as she saw them sleeping, then to Aaron, where they hardened again. She walked forward carrying a tray with food. On one side were strips of cooked meat and flat bread for herself, and on the other a small portion she placed near him. It was clear she was testing him, watching what he would do. Aaron's hands were still tied, so she set the food just close enough for him to reach if freed. For a long moment neither spoke. Then she knelt by the child and gently shook them awake. The young one blinked, rubbed their eyes, and immediately looked toward Aaron. Their small hand reached out and a soft sound escaped their lips, calling for the human as if he were family. Sira stiffened at the sight, her jaw tightening. She had expected gratitude, not attachment. The bond unsettled her. The child tried to climb down from the bed, their small body unsteady but determined. Sira allowed it, though her eyes never left Aaron. The little one limped across the floor and sat beside him, resting against his side as though it were natural. Aaron glanced down, surprised, but he did not move away. Slowly he shifted his arms even while bound to give the child more comfort. He spoke softly in his own language, words the child could not understand, but the tone was calm and gentle. The child responded with a quiet hum, leaning closer. Sira watched them, her mind in conflict. This human had not only saved her child but had gained their trust in less than a day. The young one's heart was innocent, quick to give affection. But was it wise to allow such closeness? She had been taught since her youth that humans were dangerous, selfish, and cruel. Yet the evidence before her eyes spoke differently. This soldier had risked his life with no promise of survival, and the child trusted him more than even some of her own kin. Later that day, 2 Veyran soldiers entered the tent to deliver supplies. Their eyes landed on Aaron and their faces twisted in anger. One of them growled, stepping forward with his spear raised. "Why is he still alive?" the soldier demanded in their tongue, his voice sharp. "He should be ended before he poisons the camp with his presence." The other nodded in agreement, glaring at the human as if daring him to make a move. Aaron remained still, though he understood the hostility in their tone. His heart raced, but he did not respond with fear. He simply stayed beside the child, who now clung to him protectively, sensing the tension in the room. Sira rose swiftly, her figure towering over the 2 soldiers. Her voice was strong and unyielding as she ordered them out. The soldiers exchanged uneasy looks but obeyed, though their eyes burned with resentment. They left with muttered words that hinted at disapproval. Once the tent was quiet again, Sira turned back to Aaron. Her expression was unreadable. She saw how the child's arms tightened around him, refusing to let go even when frightened. She could not deny the truth any longer. This human was no ordinary enemy. His actions had planted a seed of doubt among her people, and she herself was not free from its influence. Still, she could not show weakness. She crossed her arms and stood firm, keeping her distance. The following days passed slowly. Aaron remained tied, though his bonds were loosened enough to allow him to eat. The child visited him often, bringing him water or simply sitting by his side. They laughed in their own language, pointing at objects in the tent and waiting for him to copy their words. Aaron tried, stumbling over the strange sounds, but the child always giggled, delighted by his effort. It was the first sound of joy he had heard in this camp, and it gave him strength. Sira often observed these moments from the shadows of the tent. At first, she told herself she was only watching to ensure her child's safety. Yet each time she saw the human speak gently, or shield the little one from soldiers' harsh stares, her certainty wavered. She found herself listening to the soft tone of his voice, noticing how his eyes carried no malice. He was far from the ruthless enemy she had been trained to imagine. One evening, a storm rolled across the broken city. Rain fell hard, drumming against the tent. Thunder cracked above, shaking the ground. The child woke in fear, eyes wide, their small body trembling. Sira reached for them, but they ran to Aaron instead, pressing close against his chest. Aaron spoke softly, stroking the scaled head with his bound hands, murmuring comfort in words not understood but felt all the same. The child calmed, breathing slower, and soon drifted back to sleep in his lap. Sira stood frozen, torn between pride and pain. It was her duty as a mother to protect her child, yet it was the human who had given comfort. She felt gratitude she did not want to feel. She also felt something deeper, a question she could not silence. Was it possible that humans were not so different? Was it possible that they too knew love, compassion, and sacrifice? Outside, whispers spread through the camp. Some soldiers spoke of the strange bond between the prisoner and the commander's child. Others warned that it was dangerous to let him live. The tension grew each day like a rope stretched to its limit. Sira knew she could not ignore it forever. Yet when she looked at her child smile as they sat beside Aaron, she also knew she could not take him away. The fragile peace inside the tent continued. Aaron's body healed slowly from his wounds, though his spirit remained strong. He no longer feared each sunrise as the last he would see. Instead, he began to wonder if perhaps this strange connection could lead to something more. He knew he was still a prisoner, still surrounded by enemies, yet he also knew that in the heart of this enemy camp, he had found something rare, a small life he had saved, and a mother whose eyes no longer saw him only as a foe. As the storm faded and the night grew quiet again, Aaron closed his eyes. The child slept soundly against him, and Sira sat silently nearby, her gaze heavy with unspoken thoughts. None of them could say what the future would hold, but one truth had already taken root. Trust, fragile and uncertain, had begun to grow between human and Veyran, and once such trust is born, it is difficult to silence even in the midst of war. The days in the Veyran camp passed with growing tension. Aaron was still a prisoner, but the guards no longer tied him as tightly as before. The child spent more and more time at his side, speaking in their soft voice, pointing at things and laughing when he tried to copy their words. Sira continued to watch, always serious, but her anger toward him had faded into something more complex. She did not trust him completely, yet she could not deny the truth that her child had chosen him as a protector. Whispers among the soldiers grew louder. Some said the commander was weak for keeping a human alive. Others argued that the act of saving the child was a sign worth respecting. The camp was divided, and Sira felt the weight of every glance and every muttered word. Still, she did not give the order to end him. One night, the sky turned red with warning. Scouts rushed back to the camp, voices urgent. Human forces were moving fast, preparing an assault. The ruined city that had become their shelter would soon become a battlefield again. Sira ordered her soldiers to prepare for defense. Weapons were passed around, shields raised and formations built among the crumbling stone. Aaron sat inside the central tent, his heart pounding. He heard the alarm calls, the shouts of soldiers running into position. For the first time since being captured, he realized that his own people were coming. Freedom was close. He could almost imagine rejoining his unit, returning to his side of the war. Yet as he looked beside him, his thoughts twisted. The child sat near, clutching his arm, wide eyes full of fear. The little one did not understand that the attackers were human. To them, it was only another storm of death. Sira entered the tent, armored once more, her blade strapped across her back. Her eyes burned with resolve, but when she looked at Aaron and the child, her step faltered. For a brief moment, her commander's mask slipped, and he saw only a mother. She gave a sharp order to 2 guards, and they moved to escort Aaron out. But the child protested, clinging tighter. The clash outside began before they could move. Explosions shook the ground, lighting the sky with fire. Human forces stormed the outer line, their weapons cutting through the darkness. Screams and roars filled the camp. Aaron knew the sound of human rifles, the rhythm of their march. His people had come to crush the Veyran stronghold. The guards rushed out to join the defense, leaving Sira, the child, and Aaron alone. Sira stood ready, her blade in hand, but her eyes flicked between the battle and the child. She knew she should move them to safety, but there was no safe place in this storm. The tent shook as another blast hit nearby, and the child cried out, burying their face against Aaron. Aaron made his choice in that moment. He could have slipped away in the chaos. The ropes on his wrists were loose enough to tear free. Freedom was within reach. But as he looked at the trembling child, he knew he could not leave. His body moved before thought. He pulled the child into his arms and pressed them against his chest, just as he had done the first day. The tent wall tore open as human soldiers burst inside. Their rifles rose, ready to fire at the Veyran commander. Aaron stepped forward without hesitation, placing himself between the weapons and the child. His voice rang out in desperation. "Stop, do not shoot." The soldiers froze, confusion flashing across their faces. What they saw was not an enemy hostage. They saw one of their own shielding a Veyran child with his body. The silence lasted only a breath, but it was enough for Sira to act. She swept forward, blade flashing, and knocked the rifles aside without striking the men. Her movements were sharp, but her choice was clear. She could have killed, but she held back. The humans stumbled back, stunned, uncertain of what they had walked into. More soldiers rushed toward the tent, shouting. Aaron raised his voice again, louder this time. "Hold your fire. This child is innocent." His words rang out above the noise. Some soldiers lowered their weapons, uncertain, but others kept their rifles ready, their training urging them to finish the mission. Sira moved to stand beside Aaron, her tall frame forming a wall of protection. Her blade gleamed, but her eyes did not hold hatred. Instead, they burned with something fierce and conflicted. She was standing with a human, defending her child, and the soldiers around them could not understand it. The fighting outside pressed closer. Explosions tore through the camp and the screams of both sides filled the air. Aaron knew the danger was far from over. He shouted again, desperate to be heard. "Look at them. Look at this child. Do you see an enemy? Or do you see life?" His words carried across the tent, reaching both humans and Veyron who had gathered at the entrance. For the first time in the war, both sides hesitated. Veyron's soldiers stared, unsettled by the sight of their commander allowing a human to shield her young. Human soldiers faltered, seeing one of their own protect what they had been told was a monster. The battlefield held its breath. Then the ground shook as another blast struck nearby, collapsing part of the ruined wall. Debris rained down, and without thinking, Aaron threw himself over the child again. The stones hit his back, pain tearing through his body, but he did not move. He held firm, his arms locked around the small figure. The child whimpered but remained unharmed. When the dust cleared, all eyes were on him. Human soldiers, Veyron warriors, even Sira herself stood frozen. The image was burned into them. A human soldier had chosen not his own freedom, not victory, but the life of a child who should have been his enemy. Aaron's breath came in sharp gasps. His body ached, his strength fading, but he forced himself to stand. He kept the child close, his gaze sweeping across both groups. "We fight and fight, but what are we fighting for if we cannot protect the innocent?" His voice was hoarse but steady. Sira stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. It was not the grip of a jailer, but the touch of an equal. She looked out at her people, her voice strong. "This human risked his life for my child. Remember this. Do not call all of them monsters." Her words struck the Veyron like thunder. The human soldiers shifted uneasily. Their orders had been clear: destroy the camp. Yet none of them could lift their rifles now. They had seen something no order could erase. One of their own had broken the wall between enemies with nothing but his body and his choice. The battle did not end in that moment. The war was too vast, the hatred too old. Yet the fire of combat dimmed within the camp. Both sides stood in uneasy silence, unsure of what to do next. For a brief heartbeat, the endless killing paused, and in that pause, a seed of change was planted. Aaron held the child tightly as the night burned around them. He did not know what tomorrow would bring. Perhaps death, perhaps chains, perhaps a chance at peace. But in that instant, none of it mattered. He had chosen to protect, and that choice had been seen by all. The war would remember this night. The Veyron commander and the human soldier had stood side by side, not as enemies, but as guardians of a single innocent life. The battle did not continue long after that night. The camp was left in ruins, fires smoldering in broken walls, the ground scarred by weapons. Human forces had pushed deep into the city, but when they reached the heart of the Veyron camp and saw what had taken place, their strength faltered. The soldiers had expected to fight enemies to the death. Instead, they found their comrade shielding an alien child, standing beside the very commander they had been told to kill. Neither side knew how to continue. Shots were fired in the distance, but here in the camp, silence stretched. The human soldiers slowly pulled back, uncertain. The Veyron did not pursue, still shaken by what they had witnessed. It was as though both armies had stepped into a moment outside of war, one they could not explain. Aaron remained at the center, his arms wrapped around the child, his body trembling with exhaustion. His back throbbed from the stones that had fallen on him, and his vision blurred, but he did not release the small figure. The child clung to him with equal strength, eyes shut tight, refusing to let go. Sira stood near, her blade lowered, her breathing heavy from the clash. She looked at the human soldier, at the way he still held her young, and she felt a strange weight in her chest. Gratitude, confusion, and something she had never expected toward a human. He had risked everything, not once but twice, for the life of her child. He had chosen protection over freedom, compassion over victory. When the soldiers of both sides withdrew to regroup, the camp was left quiet, except for the cries of the wounded. Sira gave orders to her warriors to tend to their injured and rebuild what they could, but she did not allow Aaron to be taken from her sight. When one soldier questioned why the human was still alive, she silenced him with a single glare. None dared to argue again. Later, as dawn lit the horizon, Sira entered the tent where Aaron rested. His wounds had been bandaged with Veyron salve, and though he was weak, he was alive. The child sat curled beside him, fast asleep, one small hand gripping his sleeve. Aaron looked up when she entered, meeting her gaze with tired but steady eyes. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Sira knelt beside him, her voice low but firm. "You saved my child. Twice. For that, your life is no longer mine to take." Though he could not understand her words, her tone carried enough meaning. He gave a small nod, relief flickering across his face. She continued, her eyes narrowing with thought. "You are human, and my people have called your kind ruthless. But I have seen with my own eyes something different. You are not what I was told." Her words were heavy, as though she spoke not only to him but to herself. The days that followed were uneasy. Aaron was no longer tied, though he was not free to leave the camp. The child stayed close to him always, their laughter bringing light to the dark atmosphere. Other Veyran soldiers looked at him with suspicion, some with open anger, but none dared harm him under their commander's watch. Whispers filled the camp. Some called him dangerous. Others began to wonder if perhaps the war had blinded them to a truth they had ignored. News of what had happened spread quickly. Word carried across Veyran lines of the human who had saved a child. Stories grew, told by those who had witnessed it. Even among humans, whispers reached the commanders. A soldier who had chosen to shield the enemy's young instead of fighting was spoken of with disbelief and anger by some, but with respect by others. His act had planted questions in both armies, questions neither side wanted to face. One evening, as the sun sank and painted the sky red, Sira approached Aaron again. She carried no weapon, only her steady gaze. The child played nearby, stacking stones in small towers. She sat across from him, her voice quiet. "You cannot return to your people now. If you do, they may call you a traitor. If you remain here, many of mine will not accept you, yet I will not allow either side to end you." She leaned closer, her eyes sharp with decision. "You are under my protection. Not as a prisoner, but as a guardian. My child has chosen you, and I will not take that bond away." Aaron understood some of her meaning from her tone, if not all her words. He looked at the child, who smiled up at him with innocent joy, and then at Sira. Slowly, he nodded. He did not know what the future held, but he knew one thing. He would not abandon the little one he had saved. The days turned into weeks. The war did not end, but something in its rhythm changed. Where once every battle had been fought with blind fury, now hesitation grew. Soldiers remembered the night when a human had stood as a shield for an alien child. Doubt spread, and with doubt came the first fragile thoughts of peace. Within the camp, Aaron became a strange figure. Some despised him, refusing to look at him without scorn. Others watched with curiosity as he trained alongside the Veyran to show he meant no harm. The child followed him everywhere, learning his words while teaching him theirs. Soon they spoke in a mix of both languages, laughing together despite the gulf between their worlds. Sira remained close, her eyes always sharp, but her voice softer than before. She had not expected to feel anything but hatred for a human. Yet she began to see in him not just a soldier, but a man of honor. His courage had forced her to question everything she had believed about the war. In quiet moments, when the camp was calm, she would sit with him and listen as he spoke in his tongue, even if she could not understand. The sound of his voice, steady and warm, was enough. One night, when the stars were bright and the air still, she spoke again. "You have become part of this camp. My child sees you as family. Perhaps one day my people will see what my child sees." She looked at him with eyes no longer filled with suspicion, but with a rare kind of respect. Aaron did not know if peace would come in his lifetime. He did not know if humans and Veyran would ever walk side by side without fear. But he knew he had made a choice that mattered. In the ruins of war, he had protected a single innocent life, and from that choice a new path had opened. The child, sensing the quiet between them, ran to him and hugged him tightly. Rin lifted the small figure, holding them high until laughter filled the tent. Sira watched, and for the first time since the war had begun, she allowed herself a faint smile. In the days to come, many battles would still rage, and many voices would still cry for blood. But the memory of a human soldier shielding an enemy child would not fade. It would spread across both sides, whispered in camps and carried into councils. Some would ignore it, others would fight against it, but some would believe. And belief is where change begins. Aaron did not see himself as a hero. He saw only the child he had saved. the bond they shared and the promise in the mother's eyes. Yet history would remember him differently. He would be remembered as the soldier who showed both races that even in the heart of war, compassion could break through. He would be remembered as the bridge that began to form between two worlds. The war was not yet over, but a seed had been planted in blood and stone. It had been planted by one man's choice to protect instead of destroy, and that seed would one day grow into peace.